The day had been long, and the disciples of Jesus were more tired than usual. They had walked from village to village, healing the sick, comforting the broken-hearted, and spreading the word to all who would listen. Their hearts were full of compassion, but their bodies and spirits were weary. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint golden glow in the sky as night began to creep in. As they sat near a small stream, the cool water lapping gently at the banks, they felt the weariness in their bones. Yet even in their fatigue they found comfort in sitting with Jesus, who as always radiated calm and peace. Jesus looked upon his disciples with tenderness, seeing not only their tired bodies but the burdens they carried in their hearts. He knew they were struggling, not only with their physical exhaustion but with the emotional weight of constantly giving. The disciples had poured themselves out for others, and though their intentions were pure, they had begun to feel the strain of giving without pause. Sensing the unspoken need for guidance, Jesus began to speak. His voice was soft, almost like the breeze that stirred the leaves above them. "My beloved friends," he said, his eyes filled with love, "you have given much today and every day, but I see that your hearts are heavy. You have poured out your love to those in need, but I wonder, have you saved any love for yourselves?" The disciples exchanged puzzled glances. They had always been taught to serve others, to give without asking for anything in return. How could they think of themselves when so many were in need? John, the youngest among them, was the first to speak. His voice was soft but filled with sincerity. "Master, we have followed your teachings. We have tried to love as you have loved us. But sometimes it feels like no matter how much we give, it's never enough. How do we balance the call to serve with the need to rest?" The other disciples nodded in agreement, their eyes searching for answers in Jesus' face. Jesus smiled gently, understanding their struggles. "Let me tell you a story of a man named Elias, a man who loved with all his heart but had forgotten to love himself. There was a man named Elias," Jesus began, "who lived in a small village by the sea. Elias was known far and wide for his kindness. His heart was open, and he believed that true love meant never turning anyone away. His home became a refuge for the lost, the broken, the hungry, and the poor. Day after day people came to his door, seeking food, shelter, and counsel. And Elias, with his great heart, welcomed them all. At first, Elias was filled with joy. He believed that in giving everything he had, he was fulfilling his purpose. His house was always full, and his door was never closed to anyone. He was praised by the villagers, who marveled at his generosity and selflessness. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Elias began to notice a change within himself. His once bright smile began to fade. His steps grew slower, and his spirit began to feel heavy, as though he was carrying a burden far too great for one man. One evening, after another long day of giving, Elias sat alone by the fire. His hands trembled from exhaustion, and his heart felt as though it had been wrung dry. Yet even in his weariness, he heard another knock at the door. The disciples leaned in, captivated by the story. They had felt this same weariness in their own hearts, the same struggle to balance their desire to give with the need for rest. Jesus continued, his voice soft but filled with power. It was a traveler, a man with tired eyes and worn clothes. His face was lined with the marks of a long journey, and his feet were covered in dust. "Please," the traveler said, "I need a place to rest for the night. I have been walking for days and I am weary." Though Elias's body cried out for rest, his heart could not refuse. He invited the traveler in, offering him food and a place by the fire. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the flames the only sound between them. Finally the traveler spoke. His voice was gentle but filled with a wisdom that Elias had never encountered before. "You have given much today, my friend," the traveler said softly, "but I see that you are weary. Why do you carry such a heavy burden?" Elias looked into the fire, his eyes filled with fatigue. "Is it not my duty to love all who come to me?" he asked. "How can I turn anyone away when they are in need?" The traveler smiled, his face lined with understanding. Love is indeed a beautiful thing, but tell me, Elias, if a river flows without end and without boundaries, what happens to the land around it? Elias thought for a moment, confused by the question. The land would flood, he answered quietly. The river would spill over its banks and drown everything in its path. The traveler nodded. Yes, my friend. The river must have banks to guide its flow, or it will bring destruction instead of life. Your love, too, must have boundaries or it will overwhelm you. If you pour out all that you have without pause, soon there will be nothing left to give. Jesus paused, allowing the weight of the traveler's words to sink in. The disciples exchanged glances, some nodding in quiet recognition. They had felt it themselves, the endless giving, the fear of letting someone down by setting limits, the belief that love meant never saying no. Jesus continued. Elias was confused. But how can I refuse someone in need? He asked. Is that not turning away from love? The traveler's eyes sparkled with kindness, and his voice was filled with understanding. No, Elias. It is not selfish to care for yourself. It is wise. You see, love is not endless giving. Love also means knowing when to rest, when to say no, and when to take time for yourself. If you are always pouring yourself out, you will become like an empty well, and what will you offer then? A well that is dry cannot give water to the thirsty. Elias felt a deep sadness rise within him. He had always believed that loving others meant sacrificing his own needs, that by saying yes to everyone he was showing the true meaning of love. But now he realized that in giving so much, he had forgotten how to care for himself. Elias looked down at his trembling hands, feeling the weight of the traveler's words. He had given all that he had, and yet he felt more empty than ever. His once joyful heart was now burdened with the exhaustion of constant giving. His mind raced with questions. How could he, who had been so devoted to helping others, have lost sight of the need to help himself? Was this what love truly required? To sacrifice everything even at the cost of his own well-being? Jesus' voice grew softer, filled with compassion. The traveler looked at Elias, his eyes filled with both sorrow and understanding. Elias, he said gently, if you continue to give without boundaries, your heart will break under the weight of it. Your love will no longer be a gift, but a burden. You will begin to resent those you once cared for, and the joy you once found in giving will be replaced with bitterness and exhaustion. This is not what love was meant to be. Elias wept. His tears flowed freely, not out of sadness alone, but from the deep realization that he had misunderstood the very nature of love. He had believed that love meant saying yes to everyone no matter the cost to himself. But now he saw that love was more than just sacrifice. It was also about protecting the heart that gave that love. But what can I do? Elias asked through his tears. I don't know how to say no. I don't know how to set these boundaries. It feels like turning people away, like closing my heart to them. The traveler placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. You must learn that love is a balance, he said softly. Love flows both ways, and it must be nurtured within yourself as well as given to others. You are not turning people away when you set boundaries. You are ensuring that the love you give is pure, whole, and strong. A river with banks gives life, but a river without them brings destruction. Your heart is the same. Protect it and it will continue to give life. But if you let it flood, it will drown both you and those you love. Elias sat in silence, the words of the traveler sinking deep into his heart. He realized that his constant giving had not only exhausted him but had begun to distance him from those he wanted to help. He had become so focused on meeting everyone's needs that he had forgotten to nurture his own soul, to rest and to heal. And in doing so, he had begun to lose the very joy that had once filled his heart. The next morning Elias woke before dawn. The fire had long since died out and the traveler was gone. Elias felt a mixture of sorrow and relief, knowing that the traveler's words had left a permanent mark on his heart. He stood in the doorway of his home, looking out at the rising sun, feeling the warmth of a new day on his face. For the first time in many years, Elias felt light, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew now that love was not just about giving, it was about balance. It was about protecting his heart so that he could continue to give without being overwhelmed. It was about saying no, not out of selfishness but out of wisdom. Elias began to rebuild his life, setting boundaries where there had once been none. He still welcomed those in need, but now he knew when to rest, when to say no, and when to protect his heart. His love was no longer a burden, but a source of strength, flowing freely within the boundaries he had set. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Elias smiled. He had found peace. The love he gave was stronger, deeper, and truer than it had ever been. Jesus looked around at his disciples, their faces softened by the weight of the story. They sat in silence, reflecting on the deep truth they had just heard. Some of them had tears in their eyes, others sat quietly, their hearts full of the realization that they, too, had given so much that they had forgotten to care for themselves. Peter, with tears streaming down his face, was the first to speak. "Master, I never thought that by caring for myself I could love others more. I see now that I must learn to rest, to say no when I need to, so that I may have more to give when it is needed." John, the youngest disciple, wiped away his tears, his voice trembling as he spoke. "I have felt the same, Master. I have tried to love everyone, to be there for everyone, but it has become too much. I didn't realize that I was emptying myself. I thought it was wrong to say no." Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with love for his disciples. "You are not endless, my friends, but the love you carry within you is like a wellspring. Protect it and it will never run dry. Give it without care and soon there will be nothing left. Love wisely, my beloved friends. Let your love be strong, but let it also have boundaries." The disciples felt a deep peace settle over them, a peace they had not known in many months. For so long they had carried the weight of the world on their shoulders, believing that to love was to always say yes. But now they saw that in setting boundaries they were not denying love. They were protecting it, allowing it to grow and flourish in ways they had never imagined. As they stood to leave, the night sky glittered with stars, each one a reminder of the light they carried within themselves. The disciples walked back to their camp with renewed strength, their hearts lightened by the wisdom Jesus had shared. The path before them was still long and the work was still great, but now they understood that their love, like a river, needed its banks to guide it. And in that understanding they found peace. As they walked in silence, they felt the presence of Jesus beside them, his words echoing in their hearts. "Love wisely, my friends. For even the strongest tree must have roots to hold it steady. Even the deepest river must have banks to guide its flow." This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.